Good evening, I'm Janella Massa. Tonight, as Russian bombs fall on Ukraine, Vladimir Putin celebrates with a massive rally. An annual event amped up as Ukrainians take shelter.
Life is destroyed and taken.
Plus, sending a powerful message to the world about the dead. While some Russian celebrities risk speaking out.
If I need to speak what I think is right to speak.
Also tonight, a young mother grieving her child and demanding answers.
I basically pleaded to them that my baby was in danger.
The investigation into the night baby Tanner died. Plus, how the pandemic changed medical care.
Why should I have to go all the way there to sit in an office?
And the next generation of doctors.
I became very, very comfortable with uncertainty.
This is The National. With each passing day, Russia's war on Ukraine appears more stalled, even as the campaign of violence against Ukrainian civilians ramps up. Tens of thousands continue to flee cities under siege by land and air. The level of destruction hard to imagine. In an address tonight on Facebook, Ukraine's president said the time has come for meaningful peace talks. He says it's the only way for Moscow to limit the damage from its mistakes. For his part, Vladimir Putin is ramping up the propaganda war. At a rally today, he assured tens of thousands of supporters that the mission in Ukraine would be accomplished. Meanwhile, people in the western city of Lviv woke to the sound of explosions today, with Russian missiles striking just outside the city. It's been spared the worst of the war so far, but as Chris Brown explains, there are fears that could change.
The sun was just rising when a volley of Russian cruise missiles, likely fired from a ship far away in the Black Sea, struck an aircraft repair facility in Lviv. It was the closest hit to a city that's now a hub for war refugees, humanitarian aid, and likely Western weapons shipments. Putin for me equals Hitler, said the mayor Andriy Sadovyi, and I think what Hitler got awaits Putin.
Look, we've seen missiles now hit in your community a couple of times this week. How worried should people here be?
We were really worried on the first day, but now everyone understands that this is a war. Many of the city's historical treasures are now sealed up, but if or when the Russian bombs come, no one knows if that will be enough to save them. Of more immediate concern are cities such as Mariupol, where they're still pulling people, mostly women and children, from the basement beneath a theater that Russia bombed on Wednesday. President Vladimir Zelensky said Friday morning 130 people were freed, but Russian attacks have made it difficult to help hundreds more who remain trapped. The capital, Kyiv, gets hit from the air multiple times a night. Vladimir Klitschko, the champion boxer and brother of the mayor, implored Western countries to do more as Russia destroys Ukraine's cities.
Life is getting lost. Not just the infrastructure, life is getting lost. Mariupol, Kharkiv, Kherson, Bucha, Gostomel, we can count endlessly.
In a powerful statement, child strollers and car seats were set up in Lviv's Market Square to represent the children killed in the past 23 days of Russia's war against Ukraine. This couple, who fled from Bucha outside of Kyiv, found it too hard to look at. We have an even worse memorial where we come from, he said, the destroyed homes and houses of our community, even our own.
On the battlefield, the situation has changed little in the past week, with Russian forces nearing Kyiv but not moving in on it. Instead of advancing its troops, now Russia appears to be focused on destroying civilian targets, decimating homes, and grinding down Ukrainian morale. Chris Brown, CBC News, Lviv, Ukraine.
According to British intelligence this week, the Russian invasion in Ukraine has been stalled. While Russian forces have made some small gains, the map hasn't changed dramatically. And while it's hard to pierce through the fog of war, one thing is clear: the invasion is not going to plan. U.S. officials say between 3,000 and 10,000 Russian troops have been killed so far. A fierce resistance by Ukraine's military has slowed Russia to a crawl.
The Ukrainian military knows the Russian military very well. Some of its senior officers even served in the Russian military, in the Soviet military. So they know the tactics, they know the weaponry, and even more important, they know their own country. They've used surface-to-air missiles to take down Russian aircraft. They've hit many tanks and armored personnel carriers. They've dug in deep trenches. They've exploded bridges. They made it very difficult for the Russian advance.
Several senior Russian commanders have died in the war, including 4 generals, according to Ukraine.
It's very unusual for generals to lose their lives during war. That has had a major dent in the capacity for the Russians to fight. Their command and control systems do not seem to be working.
Now, all of it is a testament to Russia's dysfunction and also Ukraine's prowess. But Russia's response has been horrifying.
Russia has to resort to a more medieval tactic of laying siege to a town and denying it electricity, water, and food, and hoping that the city would then surrender. Mariupol is at a breaking point. There's such huge humanitarian catastrophe.
And those tactics could get even more brutal. Today marks 8 years since Russia's annexation of Crimea from Ukraine. And Briar Stewart is in Latvia tonight. She spent her day tracking how Russia marked that anniversary. Briar, tell us what you saw and what you found out.
Well, Janella, every year Russian communities hold celebrations to commemorate what Russia calls its reunification with Crimea. But this year it struck an entirely different tone because at all of the events were crowds professing to support what Russia insists is its special military operation. In Moscow, tens of thousands joined in for carefully choreographed patriotism. They packed a soccer stadium and crowds outside surrounded it. It was a made-for-state TV spectacular, and the letter Z was everywhere. It's marked on every Russian vehicle in Ukraine and has come to symbolize support for what's happening there. Namely, to liberate the people from this genocide of these sufferings, President Putin said in a rare public speech. But Russians watching at home didn't get to see the whole thing. State TV abruptly cut away mid-sentence, a mere technical glitch, the Kremlin later said. 200 kilometers to the east, in the community of Vladimir, a smaller gathering, but very much the same messaging. The Ukrainian people have to be liberated. My friend, a soldier, died there, this man says. They still haven't brought back his body. This is what is needed, this woman adds. It's the right decision of our president. But away from all of the flags and military symbols, a different perspective.
And I'm sorry about that war here, but we can't call it war. But it is, I think. It is.
The government is trying to control the narrative through language and images. Our CBC crew asked for permission to film at this event west of Moscow, and organizers said no because Canada is, quote, an unfriendly country. So instead, a freelance Russian cameraman gathered these images. Youth lined up, pledging support to their country, and the whole crowd forming the letter Z, making it clear just who and what they support. At the Moscow event, there were some reports that people were pressured to be there and had even been bussed in. But certainly it's a stark contrast from what we see when people take to the streets and sidewalks to protest and they're detained right away.
All right, thanks, Briar. Briar Stewart in Riga, Latvia tonight. Well, there are more doubts tonight over whether Russia is actually willing to pursue a peace deal with Ukraine. In an interview with CBC's Heather Hiscox, Canada's Foreign Affairs Minister said she doesn't believe Russia is negotiating in good faith.
What is happening right now is Ukrainians are trying to negotiate humanitarian corridors to protect civilians. Meanwhile, Russia is bombarding, is shelling civilians, which is a war crime. There are war crimes being committed. There are crimes against humanity being committed.
This week, the U.S. president went a step further, calling Vladimir Putin a war criminal, while Russia denies those allegations. A formal investigation is now underway by the International Criminal Court. The United States is again warning China, support Russia and face consequences. U.S. President Joe Biden relaying the message to Chinese President Xi Jinping today, while Chinese ambassadors to the UN continued their support for Russia there. Here's Chris Reyes.
A crucial meeting at a key moment in Russia's war against Ukraine. The U.S. says China is weighing whether to support Russia's war effort. Today, the White House says President Biden made his position clear to Chinese President Xi Jinping.
He made clear what the implications and the consequences would be if China provides material support to Russia.
From the 2-hour video conference, that's about as much detail as we got. What kind of consequences? Still unclear, though the White House says sanctions are in the toolbox.
Their proximity of moving closer together is certainly of great concern to us.
China released a statement after the call, only saying it's willing to provide further humanitarian assistance to Ukraine and other affected countries, and that all parties should jointly support Russia-Ukraine dialogue and negotiation. But today at the UN, China continued to offer support for Russia and its claims that Ukraine is running a biological weapons program.
The party concerned should respond to questions and offer timely and comprehensive clarifications.
The rest of the Security Council says that's disinformation.
And I will reiterate the United States' deep and serious concern that Russia's calling for this meeting is a potential false flag effort in action.
But while that plays out, some say the threat of Western sanctions could make Beijing rethink its support.
For most countries now, China is their number one or their number two trade partner. But of course, China took note of the very strong reaction of Western countries to the invasion of Ukraine. They have seen unprecedented solidarity, and they know that, in fact, this could apply to them.
Asked whether Canada could bring in sanctions, Minister of Foreign Affairs Melanie Joly noted the many links between the Chinese and Canadian economies and called for diplomatic solutions first. Chris Reyes, CBC News, New York.
Turning now to the pandemic and a note of caution from Canada's top doctor. Dr. Theresa Tam says even though provinces are scrapping mandates, she still feels strongly recommending wearing a mask in some settings.
Yes, it is a personal decision at this point when mandates are being removed. But I would say, given the possibility of the uptick in cases, it's prudent to just wear a mask for now.
Several provinces, including BC and Alberta, have already scrapped their mask rules. Ontario is set to drop its mandate for most indoor public spaces on Monday. Nova Scotia also making that move Monday, though after some pushback, it's keeping masks in schools for the time being.
It is clear that the best decision, based on today's information, is to keep masking in schools for now until the middle of April.
While the mask mandate for other public settings will be dropped Monday, the Nova Scotia government says individual businesses can enforce the rule, and masks will still be required in high-risk settings like hospitals. Well, we now know how much the truck convoy cost the city of Ottawa, over $36 million, according to a memo to city councillors. Almost all of that is the cost of policing the protest, which lasted for weeks and culminated in a massive police action to end it. The cost doesn't include the losses to downtown businesses. That's estimated to be in the millions. The convoy rolled into Ottawa at the end of January to protest COVID restrictions. An Indigenous woman says her baby son might still be alive if Prince Albert police had listened to her urgent and multiple pleas for help. The death of Tanner Brass last month has outraged members of that community, and today they demanded action. Jason Wark has the story.
A young Saskatchewan mother is dealing with an unimaginable loss. Today at a news conference, Kyla Frenchman could barely speak about the death of her 13-month-old little boy.
Do you want to talk about that night? No.
But in an interview earlier this week, she told CBC News about her frantic calls for help the night Tanner died. Frenchman says she told her partner she was leaving him. She says he became abusive and she was locked out of the apartment building. Her baby still inside.
It was Just worried, fearful, stressed out.
She said she got a hold of a neighbor's phone and called police. When police arrived, Frenchmen begged the officers to go in and check on Tanner. She says they went in, knocked on the door, but when they emerged, they said that no one answered. That's when police handcuffed and detained Frenchmen for suspected intoxication, which she denies.
I feel angry towards the police for not helping me when I basically pleaded to them that my baby was in danger.
Now, Indigenous leaders are demanding change.
We want action, and it has to be now. It has to be immediate.
Her lawyer calls it a case of discrimination. Frenchmen and other community advocates are calling for the immediate firing of all officers involved. 2 officers have been suspended. The Prince Albert police chief has expressed the importance of being transparent to the community. The case is also under investigation by the province's police watchdog. In a statement, it told CBC News they hope to complete their investigation by the end of the month. Prosecutors will then decide if charges against the officers are warranted, while Kayla Frenchman mourns her baby.
He loved watching Blue's Clues. He liked dancing. He loved taking a bath.
Jason Warwick, CBC News, Saskatoon.
Well, CBC News has learned an entity of the Catholic Church is opening up some never-before-seen archives. For the first time, researchers will have access to files tied to infamous residential schools. And as Olivia Stefanovic reports, some survivors are hopeful for long-awaited answers.
Every child matters.
Evelyn Korkmaz is searching for a part of her residential school history that could be hidden thousands of kilometers away.
These documents do not belong in Rome. They belong here in Canada. She has no idea, you know.
Korkmaz was 10 years old when she started attending St. Anne's. She still remembers stories of children who disappeared.
They were buried somewhere on our school grounds or in the area.
Now, CBC News has learned the Oblates, the Catholic entity that ran the institution, is ready to open its archive in Rome.
This would help greatly to find, where these unmarked graves are.
The discovery of more than 200 unmarked graves in Kamloops, also run by the Oblates, led to an agreement with the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation.
Every document that might be related to the residential school history should be made available.
The Oblates ran 48 schools, including some of Canada's most notorious. The archive could contain letters from missionaries to religious leaders about their work in Canada.
The archives in Rome is such a wild card for us at the moment. It's the context of how these schools operated that will help to understand who was missing.
Researchers are still negotiating access. They say the Oblates are open to releasing staff files, but have asked to restrict information on priests who are still alive.
Those ones are the ones that are continuing to do damage.
Korkmaz doesn't want researchers to face any barriers.
It's time to open that door of horrors and take a look at what's inside.
Because she says healing can only come when the full truth is brought to light. Olivia Stefanovic, CBC News, Ottawa.
Support is available for anyone affected by residential schools. You can access emotional and crisis referral services by calling the 24-hour National Crisis Line. That number is on your screen right now. Well, throughout the pandemic, many Canadians were forced to see their doctors virtually, and some really liked it.
I haven't had to close a business down just to go to the doctor.
Coming up, provinces are now deciding, should it stay that way?
A lot of the doctors prefer in-person visits.
Plus, the cost of living is rising, and some businesses have a solution.
We actually have the means to have an economy without poverty.
But others say it won't work. And Russian stars are speaking out against the war.
If I need to speak what I think is right to speak.
But at what cost? We're back in 2. A powerful celebration of spring in Kyiv, even as Russian forces surround that city. Residents whose lives have been turned upside down took to the city's central square to arrange some 1.5 million tulips in the shape of Ukraine's coat of arms. Well, today, a Russian ballerina gave her first on-camera account of why she suddenly left Moscow's famed Bolshoi Ballet. She had criticized the invasion of Ukraine, something Russian celebrities face pressure to do, but it can be daunting. Cameron McIntosh starts with the dancer who refused to stay silent.
A prima ballerina of the famed Bolshoi Ballet,
This war was started by Russia.
Olga Smirnova openly opposes Russia's invasion of Ukraine. She'll now dance with a company in the Netherlands so she can speak freely.
If I need to speak what I think is right to speak, and if I need to leave the country for that, I will leave the country.
Since the invasion, Russian celebrities and athletes have been under pressure internationally to denounce Vladimir Putin.
Please, no more war.
At the beginning, Alexander Ovechkin, one of Russia's most high-profile athletes, called for peace, but wouldn't call out Putin. There are reports he declined to remove this picture of the two from his Instagram account, fearing reprisal.
Said, like, I'm not in politics, like, I'm an athlete.
I think it's highly unlikely that something like that would trigger any kind of retaliation against his family.
Russia expert Jeff Sahadeo says Putin wouldn't likely risk a PR battle with a star like Ovechkin, unless he became outspoken.
Putin doesn't want to fight that battle because he doesn't want to draw attention to anything that goes against his narrative.
Still some chilling precedents. Last year, New York Rangers star Artemi Panarin was charged with assault in Russia. The Rangers publicly said the incident was fabricated and called it intimidation for speaking out against Putin. And what you're seeing are some very general anti-war statements, like this Instagram post from Calgary Flames defenseman Nikita Zadarov, or this from tennis player Andrei Rublev.
Nothing is important that much as to have a peace and everyone healthy.
Ukrainian tennis player Marta Kostic says it doesn't go far enough.
You don't have to be into politics or into deep stuff to just be a human being.
For Smirnova and other Russians, the stakes of speaking out are only getting higher, with the Kremlin warning of prison sentences of up to 15 years. Cameron McIntosh, CBC News, Winnipeg.
Russia won't be able to play Poland in a FIFA World Cup qualifier on Thursday. The Court of Arbitration for Sport has dismissed an urgent plea from Russia to freeze a FIFA ban on its teams ahead of next week's match. That means Russia could be out of next year's World Cup for good. A full appeal from the Russian Soccer Federation could come within weeks. After the break, new doctors had to put their specialties on hold to help with the pandemic.
The learning environment with a pandemic as well is a huge challenge.
How the pandemic shaped the next generation of doctors. Plus,
why should I have to go all the way there to sit in an office and have them go, okay, I'll give you 3 more months?
The debate over virtual healthcare. Is it here to stay? And should it? Stay with us. When the pandemic hit 2 years ago and many of us were figuring out how to work from home, there was also a dramatic shift in healthcare. Many places started offering it virtually. And now provinces are trying to figure out whether it worked and what the future of care should look like. Bonnie Allen reports on the debate underway in Saskatchewan and why some doctors are urging caution.
Driving hundreds of kilometers to see a doctor has been part of life in rural Saskatchewan for decades. But now, this. From her living room, Marie Trafford diagnosed virtually.
It has saved me like a lot of money because I haven't had to close a business down just to go to the doctor.
Before the pandemic, Saskatchewan physicians had no choice but to see patients in person. The province wouldn't pay them for virtual care. The pandemic forced that change. Amy Van Vleck works from home with 3 dogs and a son who's homeschooled. A doctor diagnosed her with shingles virtually and renewed her prescriptions.
Why should I have to go all the way there to sit in an office and have them go, okay, I'll give you 3 more months and then you leave? It's such a waste of time for everybody.
Now the government has launched public consultations to decide what happens post-pandemic.
A lot of the doctors prefer in-person visits, especially if it's a patient that has some specific ailment and they need to get hands on the patient.
It's a conversation happening across Canada.
We need to make sure that we aren't leaving people behind.
The Canadian Medical Association just published a report that flags worries over standards of care lagging.
The proliferation of sort of a virtual walk-in care model via telehealth, that will not be high-value care for most Canadians. So we need to be very careful that virtual care accompanies a doctor-patient relationship.
In other words, some things are best done in person, but for others, the convenience is just too good.
I honestly think it's probably the best thing to come out of the pandemic, if you will.
Figuring out when it's appropriate to see your doctor from home, how often, and how much the doctor gets paid, all part of redefining the healthcare system. Bonnie Allen, CBC News, Meadow Lake, Saskatchewan.
Well, the COVID-19 pandemic also disrupted the education of medical residents. Instead of getting specialized training in their fields, they were thrown into the mix to help manage the pandemic. Now, as Julia Wong explains, some fear how that gap might impact their careers.
Charlotte McEwen wanted to become a surgeon because she loves the operating room. Problem is, she hasn't been there as much. The pandemic has been getting in the way.
I expected to be completely focused on cardiac surgery and not impacted as well by COVID-19. But I think it's, it is what it is.
McEwen is a first-year cardiac surgery resident at Hamilton General Hospital, but many hospitals had postponed surgeries to make space for COVID-19 patients, and that has postponed some learning for newly minted doctors such as McEwen.
It's a challenge for cardiac surgery residents and for surgery residents across Canada, frankly, right now, to have less training right now than normally we would.
The impact may be most profound on a certain group of medical students. Like McEwen, Conley Kriegler was in his third year of medical school when the pandemic broke in March 2020.
We were pulled from the hospitals for a period of a few weeks, which obviously disrupted our learning.
Even when students did return to hospitals for training, there were limitations, he says.
I saw smaller patient volumes and saw reasonable amount of patients virtually or via telephone.
Both graduated last summer. Virtual graduation ceremonies with little fanfare and celebration were the only signal they were now officially doctors.
I've described it as a cold shock of water. Certainly, the learning environment with a pandemic as well is a huge challenge.
Their education interrupted by COVID. Their residencies disrupted too. There were fewer procedures because of the pandemic, redeployments to help with busy COVID wards. All took away from what they would normally be doing and learning.
When I talk to my colleagues, we are concerned generally about, the impacts that this has on our medical education. There's no question. I think it's going to take some years before I'm confident that I can tackle every challenge in cardiac surgery.
There were some worries, but maybe at least taking a positive spin to it. Going through medical school through the pandemic, I became very, very comfortable with uncertainty.
With the belief he will make up on missed time before his 5-year residency is over. The Association of Faculties of Medicine of Canada declined an on-camera interview. In a statement, it assures Canadians these medical graduates are clinically competent and prepared for lifelong learning through the phases of their career. It says they are learning how to practice in this new environment, and while the opportunities are different, they reflect the care that is provided now. But that type of care, fueled by the pandemic, won't always be what McEwen and Kriegler will practice. These days, running helps Kriegler cope with the stress.
Running specifically kind of gives me the chance to be able to kind of remove myself from all of the chaos that is going on around me, or all of the things that are up in the air. It's real life, there's going to be challenges, there's going to be difficulties, but I couldn't imagine doing anything other than what I am.
In some ways, I come to this fresh and with some energy and with some support and some extra reserves.
Though so much is still up in the air, one thing is not. The pandemic has reaffirmed their career choice.
I love this work. I'm built for it. I think I'm meant for it. So certainly, there's a lot of optimism in my day-to-day when I look forward to the future.
and meant to practice medicine in a pandemic that will define who they are and who they become as physicians. Julia Wong, CBC News, Edmonton.
Russia's war on Ukraine has put a premium on oil and gas. The UK is looking to Saudi Arabia for help. But with a poor human rights record, is that Europe's only choice? Next, we go beyond the headlines and discuss if Canada could and should fill the gap. And a little later,
the world needs a bit of Canada right now.
The Ontario nurses taking a moment away from the crisis of the pandemic to help those fleeing war. Stay with us.
Name an occupation where it could get awkward to take on friends as clients. A stripper.
Well, if you've filled up at a gas tank lately, you know all about the pain at the pump. Prices are sky high amid inflation, uncertainty, and sanctions slapped on Russian oil. That's left some world leaders turning to countries like Saudi Arabia for their fossil fuel needs, including UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson, who traveled there this week. But is it okay to shop for oil from countries with problematic and even stained human rights records? And what about Canadian oil? Or is it the time to fight for more climate change-friendly solutions? Let's go beyond the headlines with Deborah Yedlin. She's a business commentator and the chair of the Calgary Chamber of Commerce, and Zipporah Berman, the International Program Director for STAND, a North American environmental organization. Hi to both of you. I'll start with Deborah. You know, as we said, as bans on Russian oil and gas expand, countries are left with a difficult choice to make deals with countries with problematic human rights records like Saudi Arabia. How can we justify that when, on the one hand, leaders are, you know, horrified by these crimes, but making nice with Saudi Arabia?
Well, when you look at it from the perspective of what's been going on, we see that the ESG, in theory, do matter, environmental, social, and governance, and certainly Canada ranks above the top when you look at all those three metrics. The fact that Prime Minister Boris Johnson and others are looking to other jurisdictions to buy their oil is extremely unfortunate. We see major oil companies leaving Russia for reasons because they are worried about the social and the governance issues. And yet, on the other hand, you see governments turning to other oil-producing nations. The reality is we have this situation has exposed energy security in a way that we've never really thought about it since the 1970s.
Zipporah, do you think Canadians have the stomach for this? If gas prices are so high, do they care where it's coming from?
I think what Canadians want is we want to pay less. We want our lives to be more affordable. The answer to that is not doubling down in a system that is vulnerable, that is expensive, that has price shocks, that puts power in the hands of a very few, and very often in the hands of dictators. You know, the fossil fuel industry has been quick, even before the missiles dropped, to use this moment, this war, as an argument for increasing oil and gas exports and our dependence on oil and gas. But the answer is really not more oil. As the IEA said today, I think the answer is less oil. It's to get off of a system that is causing climate change, that's causing wars, and that's costing us a lot, not just in how we heat our homes and get around, but also in health costs and in asthma rates in children. And so luckily we can change to alternatives today. We have the capacity to have large-scale electrification and renewables, and that's what we need to do to get off this juggernaut.
Deborah, I suppose it's fair to say you disagree. I see you making a face there. And, you know, at the same time, you and others see this as an opportunity for Canada. But is that a viable alternative right now?
So here's the thing. What we're talking about are temporal issues. There is a huge disconnect in terms of where we are and where we need to go. We know where we are. We know we have to decarbonize by 2050. But how we get there, we still don't know. And I think all we have to do is look at Germany and realize what that temporal disconnect really looks like. We can have all the aspirations we want, but the IEA has also said that the technologies we need to get to 2050 and decarbonize don't exist today. What we do have in the short term is some things that will work, like carbon capture and storage and carbon capture utilization and storage. And those are two pieces that we're moving forward to implement so that we can start decarbonizing our entire carbon footprint. So, yes, we have to have an and conversation. We have not found a substitute for the very dense hydrocarbon molecule. What we need to do is continue to invest in R&D. And by the way, the energy sector is the largest investor in clean tech in Canada and around the world. More than $13 billion has been invested since 2010. And so there's no decarbonization without the energy sector being involved. And I think that's the piece that we have to recognize.
Zipporah, I'll let you chime in there because I think what Deborah's trying to say is we have to look at the now, we have to look at sort of the interim until we can get to that place where we want to be. So should Canada be making it easier for countries to turn to us in that interim instead of countries like Saudi Arabia?
It's not a renewable, it's not a transition if we're expanding the problem. The idea that we can expand fossil fuels at this moment in history when we know that they're costing lives and livelihoods, that they're increasing the costs of food, the costs of pretty much everything. I lived through the heat dome in British Columbia last year and then the floods. Climate change is happening now. And if you look at all of the major studies around the world now, from the IPCC to the IEA, it will cost us less if we act now. So it's true. It's about what we can do right now. And building new oil and gas infrastructure is not something that's going to help Europe right now. Maybe we should be exporting more oil if we can to Europe right now from existing production. But increasing production right now is not something that we can afford to do. But what we can afford to do, we can do a whole bunch of measures, just like the IEA said today in its 10-point plan. They said if we lower speed limits, if we make transit cheaper, if we boost EVs, if we drop transit fares, a number of simple initiatives, then that would be like taking all the cars off the road in China. And so we need stronger rules to decrease our dependence on oil. And we need to be scaling up renewables as quickly as we can. And in fact, Deborah, with all respect, is wrong. We have the technology today for large-scale renewables and electrification infrastructure. And in fact, many countries are already there and moving much quicker than Canada to produce a lot more renewable energy. And some of the infrastructure that we need is simple. This is not about more oil. This is about heat pumps and retrofitting houses so that we use less oil.
Deborah, I've got just about a minute left. I mean, you have said that climate concerns still need to be in the forefront. How do you balance those with the ethical considerations and the current reliance on fossil fuels?
Well, I think what we have to have is that and conversation. And so we have to move towards developing the technologies that we need to move into that net zero world. But we also have to realize this is about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We still need to make sure that people are warm, that they can be accessing the energy that they need in order to live their lives. And the reality is, too, this is also a developing world issue. They need to be able to decrease their carbon footprint by getting off coal, and that means switching to natural gas and renewables. But the thing is, it will not happen overnight. And we have to actually look at things like increasing our copper production capacity. In fact, we have to double it. And there hasn't been a new copper mine that's come on stream since 1988. So there's a lot of pieces that have to fall into place for us to get to where we need to go. The point is, we all recognize where we need to go. We also have to recognize that the path to getting there is not going to be easy, it's not going to be cheap, and it's not going to be fast. Well, we have to have a mix of everything as we move forward to decarbonizing the global industrial complex.
A big conversation, but we'll have to leave it there. Deborah Yedlin and Zipporah Berman, thanks both for your time.
Thanks for having me.
Next on The National, a new way of doing business.
There's no feeling of being disposable.
Some companies offer a solution to the rising cost of living.
I'm Jamie Poisson. Join me for CBC's daily news podcast, Front Burner. Every weekday, Front Burner takes you deep into the stories shaping Canada and the world. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
Volkswagen is recalling more than 200,000 vehicles in the U.S. and Canada. It applies to certain models of the Atlas and Atlas Cross sports SUVs. The company says faulty wiring can make them break unexpectedly. You can check if the recall applies to your vehicle on the Volkswagen website or with their customer service. Well, this week, new data confirmed what many Canadians are feeling. Inflation is at its highest point in over 30 years, with everything from groceries to gasoline getting more expensive. We're taking a look at how people are coping as part of our special coverage called Priced Out. Alison Northcott shows us some Canadian businesses who are taking a fresh approach to paying their workers. And some say the change can be life-changing.
Those go away.
Patricia Massey says her Vancouver bookstore wouldn't be here if it weren't for her staff, and says paying them a wage they can live on matters.
Because I'm responsible for, paying somebody a wage that's going to allow them to pay their bills and just to support their families.
She's one of a growing number of small business owners and organizations certified as living wage employers, paying workers based on a calculation that reflects the true cost of living in their region.
Rent of an apartment, food, transportation, and then a big one as well is childcare.
For Yana Rankov, earning more at the bookstore has meant going from having 3 jobs to 2.
It feels good as an employee to see how highly we're valued. There's no feeling of being disposable.
We actually have the means to have an economy without poverty.
Min Nguyen calculates the living wage in Quebec each year. For Montreal, it's about $18 an hour, $4.50 more than the province's minimum wage.
They think about money all the time. Whereas if they actually earned a living wage, they would have more freedom, they could have more lightness in their lives, they could think about the future.
Some students are doing French classes, English classes.
At this Montreal nonprofit, Nguyen's calculation is used to determine employees' wages.
You're less stressed because when you don't get paid and you don't get recognized with your employer and you get paid minimum wage, it not only affects your mental health, but your motivation to go to work.
There's hope more larger companies will start signing on too, but some say rather than pushing for higher wages from some businesses, the focus should be on targeted government policies to help people out of poverty.
To drive up the wage of small businesses that already have very small profit margins and they have high failure rates. I don't think it's the way to go. I don't think it'll be effective.
But back in Vancouver, Massey says it's worth the extra costs to keep her employees and keep her business going strong. Alison Northcott, CBC News, Montreal.
Well, after the break, why a group of Canadian registered nurses is helping those fleeing Ukraine.
Hope is what drives the human spirit going forward. It is the Canadian way.
Our moment is next. You're looking at a group of registered nurses from Ontario who've taken a break from the pandemic to take on another crisis. They're currently providing much-needed medical care for refugees at the border between Poland and Ukraine. The nurses who are giving back are our moment.
The reason why I'm doing this is because the world needs a bit of Canada right now. I'm going to do a small scan, if you will, where I am. So the warming center that also has clinical services that we're providing services in there. And we have a lot of nonprofits here as well, alongside of government officials, whether it's bringing food to the table, a warm welcome. The greater need of medical services is needed at the Ukraine side of the border. And our team has started alongside with the Polish medics and the emergency management system team with Poland. They've done a phenomenal job, and we're trying our best to add our services and skill sets at one of the many Ukrainian-Poland borders, but from the Ukraine side, so we can do some of triaging there of emergency services and stabilization, so then they can be airlifted to one of the hospitals in Poland that are in conjunction with the emergency services there. This is meaningful work. This is what we do best. This is how we keep the human spirit alive of hope. And that is what we're doing right now. We're lighting that candle of hope for the like Ukraine is. And hope is what drives the human spirit going forward. It is the Canadian way.
Just incredible. You know, so many healthcare workers here in Canada have been broken by this pandemic, understandably so. They're overworked, they're underappreciated. So to see this group that's gone from one crisis to another and with a smile, it's just inspiring. That is the National for March 18th. Thanks so much for watching. Have a good night.